That night, when I stepped into the kitchen to get a glass of water, there was another envelope on the table with no name on it. Inside was only one typed line. Tessa, don't sleep in that house tonight. Check the third kitchen cabinet on the left. I lived alone, locked my doors carefully, and had never told anyone details about my kitchen. So, who was close enough to me to know that exact spot? I stood frozen under the dim yellow light, torn between throwing the letter straight into the trash and the irresistible urge to open the cabinet. That harmless-looking wooden compartment, which had only ever held bottles, seemed to be hiding a secret breathing right behind my back. When I tapped lightly on its side, a dry click echoed, as if there were a hollow space inside. And then I found a tiny USB drive, dusty as if it had been lying there for a long time. What chilled me wasn't the USB itself, but this: who had put it there, and why did they want me to find it on this very night? The glow of my laptop screen cast a cold light over my face, making the room feel as if it had lost all warmth. As soon as the USB was plugged in, a folder opened with dozens of videos spanning months. All of them were shot from the same angle. My living room. The gray sofa, the rug I had bought in Portland, the old picture frame on the shelf, everything so familiar it felt suffocating. But what made my throat tighten was knowing someone had placed a camera there, secretly watching every moment in the space I thought was absolutely private. My hands shook as I scrolled, randomly selecting one file. The footage opened, the dim shadow of the living room, only light spilling through the window. A man appeared, moving as if he owned the place. A dark suit, a tall frame, careful but unhurried motions. He rifled through my desk drawers, pulling out folders I had neatly kept in plastic sleeves. Each time he turned, the silver watch on his wrist caught the weak light, and flashed. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I couldn't keep watching. The violation made my skin crawl. I yanked the USB out, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped it on the floor. In my head one question roared: who had planted a camera in my house? Unable to explain it on my own, I thought immediately of Evan. He had been my friend since college, now working in cybersecurity for a tech company in Seattle. We'd once shared all-nighters over sketches and impossible projects. Evan was the type who could still give a small smile even when overwhelmed, and I trusted him more than anyone. I called him right then. The phone rang 3 times before his lazy but warm voice came on. Tessa. Calling this late, what's going on? Evan, I need you to come to my house, right now. Please. It took only a few words for him to know I wasn't joking. About 40 minutes later, a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Evan in a thick jacket, hair slightly messy, carrying his familiar laptop backpack. You look like you've seen a ghost, he joked, but his eyes narrowed with worry when he saw my face. I handed him the USB. Evan plugged it into his laptop, his fingers gliding over the keys with his usual calm. I watched him open file after file, eyes scanning the same images I had glimpsed moments earlier. This is a hidden camera, the kind that's very hard to detect if you're not looking for it, Evan said, his voice dropping. Whoever set this up is a pro. Have you seen a clear face yet? I shook my head, gripping my glass of water. I only saw a figure. But there's something familiar. He switched to another file, fast-forwarding until the picture sharpened. This time, the man bent near the cabinet, his face tilting just as the mirror by the door reflected him. It was only an instant, but enough for me to recognize the features I could never forget. All sounds faded, leaving only the pounding in my chest. Evan slowly turned to me, eyes probing. You recognized him, didn't you? I pressed my lips together. That image. It was Daniel. My ex-husband. The man who had vanished from my life 5 years ago without a single explanation. I tore my gaze from the screen, my body rigid. Memories surged. That final morning when he walked out, leaving me with stacks of debt and a shattered marriage. I had thought he had fled, or deliberately cut every tie. It had taken me years to rebuild after that wound. And now here he was again, quietly appearing inside my own home. Evan leaned back, arms crossed, his face unusually tense. Tessa, if that really is Daniel, this isn't a break-in. Someone's trying to send you a message. I stared at the screen, at Daniel rifling through my papers. A shiver ran down my spine. This was the start of a storm I had never imagined. Evan, why would he be here? And who left me that note? He didn't answer right away. He simply closed the laptop, as if to keep the secret sealed a little longer. But I knew, from that moment on, both of us understood. My past had never truly left me. It had been waiting for the right moment to return, darker and more dangerous. I didn't move. My eyes stayed on the blank screen. The name Daniel pounded in my head, each syllable like a hammer strike. Evan didn't ask more. Maybe he knew I needed a moment to piece together what had happened. But the quiet brought no comfort. It felt like an old box being opened, letting memories I had buried under years of dust spill out again. I remembered that morning 5 years ago. Daniel leaving in a gray suit, tie straight, the scent of cologne lingering in the air. He said he had an early meeting, told me not to wait for lunch. But that was the last time I ever saw him walk through the door. By evening, the bank called, the loan in both our names was due, and Daniel's account was empty. I went cold, discovering all the mortgage papers and loan contracts bore my signature. He had vanished, taking everything, leaving me in a maze of debt. I had run from law office to law office, begged bank employees, but the answer was always the same, cold and uniform. You signed. It's your responsibility. No one cared that I'd been deceived. No one wanted to hear my husband had staged an entire performance. I lost my first home, where I had planted lavender by the porch. I sold my car, gathered every small piece of jewelry to pay down the debt. Sometimes I worked 16 hours a day, taking on projects nobody else wanted, to keep myself from collapsing completely. To outsiders I looked composed, well-dressed, still smiling politely at meetings. But inside I was cracked. Every night, behind a closed door, the betrayal sat in every dark corner. I wondered if Daniel would ever return, if there was an explanation that could make sense of it. Slowly, I stopped waiting. I poured everything into rebuilding, creating a new home in this coastal town, where I believed the past couldn't reach me. And yet now, he had reappeared in my new house. Not with an apology, not with remorse, but as a shadow in a secret recording. He rifled through my files as if he still had ownership, as if my collapse had never happened. Evan's soft cough pulled me back from the memory. Tessa, I think you need to know exactly what he's after. Those folders in the video, are they important documents? I tried to recall. On my living room desk, I usually kept some design drafts and a few client contracts, nothing connected to Daniel. I shook my head slightly. I'm not sure. But clearly, he didn't come here by accident. Evan leaned closer, his eyes steady. You've been living quietly for a long time, but this can't be taken lightly. I'll back up everything on the USB. We need to find out who sent you that letter, and why Daniel came back now. I nodded, but the weight inside me remained. The old pain had never truly disappeared. It had only slept, waiting for a small touch to flare up. Seeing Daniel's face flicker on that video, I felt both rage and a sharp ache in my chest. How many times had I asked myself, was I not good enough? Did I deserve to be left like that? Now maybe the answer wasn't as simple as a love gone stale. Maybe there were still secrets I didn't know. I stood up, walked to the window, looking down at the empty street. The yellow streetlights stretched into streaks. Outside was calm, but inside me there was a storm. I knew I had to face all the cracks I had been hiding. Evan, I need to go see my mother. She always liked Daniel. Maybe she knows something I don't. He didn't object. Go. But Tessa, be careful. If everything is as I fear, this isn't about two people who used to be married. I drew a deep breath, my hand pressed to my chest to steady the erratic beat. 5 years ago, I had been left with debts and unanswered questions. Now Daniel had returned in the shadows, and I was forced to touch the most painful memory of my life. On the table, the typed note still lay there, its cold words etched like a scar. Don't sleep in that house tonight. I understood then that my peaceful sleep was over. I drove along the coastal road, the morning fog so thick the black asphalt blurred ahead of me. Sparse streetlights smeared into trembling streaks of light. My hands gripped the steering wheel, heart thudding unevenly, my mind tangled with Daniel's figure flickering in that video. Every mile made the memories surge harder, as if the road itself were pushing me back toward the things I'd tried to forget. My mother's house sat on the edge of town, a classic white wooden home with a wide porch where she used to sit reading the paper every morning. Passing through the wooden gate, I slowed down without thinking. The rose bushes she tended still bloomed brightly, their scent soft and familiar. Everything was achingly familiar, yet today every detail felt like it was closing in on me. She opened the door right after my knock. Margaret still looked put together. A pale blue cardigan, silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, the sharp eyes that had always made me feel both safe and suffocated as a child. "Tessa, why so early?" she asked, a little surprised, her voice warm as always. I stepped inside, setting my bag on the floor. The warmth and the smell of baked goods drifted from the kitchen, as if this were another ordinary morning. "I need to talk to you. About Daniel." I saw her hand falter slightly as she poured the coffee. Only a second, but enough for me to notice. Her eyes flicked at me and then softened, as if trying to calm the wave that had risen. "Tessa, how many years has it been? You still haven't let go," she said, sitting across from me and handing me a hot cup of coffee. I looked straight into her eyes. I saw him. In my house. The cup in her hand trembled, coffee rippling to the edge, a few drops spilling onto the porcelain. She set it down quickly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Are you sure? Maybe it was someone who looked like him." "Daniel. Daniel is gone." I shook my head, feeling my blood rise. "No, Mom. It was him. I can't mistake him. And I want to know, what did you know about his disappearance?" The air in the kitchen grew dense, pressing on my chest. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever. I saw her eyes waver, as if battling herself. Then she turned to the window, staring at the garden wet with dew. "There are things you don't need to know, Tessa. Trust me." My chest tightened. Those words were hauntingly familiar. All through my childhood, whenever I asked about sensitive family matters, she would answer the same way. But now it wasn't some harmless secret. It was about Daniel, about my own safety. "Don't need to know?" I repeated, my voice shaking but cold. "You want me to keep living in the dark, only to discover my ex-husband sneaking into my house like a thief?" Margaret sighed, her shoulders quivering. "It's more complicated than you think. Daniel, he's not the man you believed he was." I gave a brittle laugh, tears slipping out uncontrollably. "So you knew. You always knew." Her eyes were cloudy, holding 1,000 untold stories. Her hand trembled on the table, almost reaching for mine but stopping short. "Sweetheart, sometimes the truth doesn't set anyone free. It only makes everything worse." That answer was as good as an indirect confession. She knew something. Maybe more than I imagined. And her evasion frightened me more than any video. "I've already lost everything once, Mom. I won't let it happen again," I said, my voice choked but firm. Margaret's gaze flickered, then settled on me for a long moment. She gave a small nod, as if accepting that I had crossed a line and there was no way back. I left my mother's house feeling both heavy and hollow. The road back to the coastal town was veiled in mist, the sound of distant waves like a heartbeat pounding in my chest. I drove almost blindly, needing only to get away from her unreadable eyes and the evasive words she'd spoken. In my mind, images of Daniel slipping into my living room, his face caught in the mirror, and my mother's tired eyes as she said, "There are things you don't need to know," wove together like an unfinished film with no ending. I knew I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed answers, and the only way was to go back to Evan, where I could trace every fragment from that strange USB. When I reached my apartment, the living room light was still on. Evan sat at the desk, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, fingers tapping rapidly. He looked up as soon as he heard the door, tension and relief flickering in his gaze. "Tessa, I found something else," he said, his voice low and decisive. I took off my coat and sat beside him, my heart hammering. "Tell me." Evan turned the screen toward me. On it appeared a new folder, its file names a string of random characters. "There's a file on the USB that's heavily encrypted. It took me nearly 2 hours to crack. And this is what I found." He clicked. A bank statement opened, rows of numbers, dates, transaction codes. But one detail stunned me: massive transfers, each between $200,000 and $300,000, all flowing into a fund called Aurora Children's Foundation. It sounded like a charity for children, but the authorized signatory line made my heart seize. Margaret Moore, I whispered, my voice rasping. Evan looked at me, his face tightening. Your mother. I couldn't speak, frozen in place. In my head echoed her words from that morning. There are things you don't need to know. She had known, she was even part of it all. Not only that, Evan went on, pointing at the small notes at the bottom of the statement. I found Daniel listed as a corresponding transfer party in several transactions 6 years ago. He seems directly tied to this fund. I turned to Evan, my eyes wide. You mean Daniel didn't disappear because he ran away? He nodded slowly, his voice heavy. I think he was forced to disappear without a word. Like being gagged so he wouldn't expose these irregular transfers. The room felt suddenly airless. My hands wouldn't steady. All the pain from 5 years ago now took a different shape, not betrayal, but maybe a much larger scheme. Evan, do you understand what this means? I asked, my voice tight. If Daniel really knew and vanished because of it, then, my mother is directly involved. He studied me for a long moment, as if measuring how much I could take before speaking again. It's not ready to conclude yet, but it's clear this Aurora fund isn't clean. The transfers lead to shady destinations, some routed through shell companies overseas. The legal signatory is Margaret Moore. Tessa, this isn't a family matter anymore. This is finance, this is politics. Cross-checking the routing numbers, Evan found matching entries in public charity filings. On paper it looked compliant. In practice the flows looped through shells and came back disguised as grants. I sat rooted to my chair, torn inside. I remembered my mother and Daniel sitting together in the living room, laughing over future plans. She had cherished him so much I'd sometimes felt jealous, thinking she loved her son-in-law more than me. And now those two names appeared together in the same murky bank file. I need to know the truth. If my mother's involved, I have to face it. And if Daniel didn't abandon me but got pulled into this, then I need to know that too. Evan handed me printed copies of the key statements. Take these. They're copies, I'm keeping the originals secure. But Tessa, be careful. These numbers are the kind people would bury forever. My hands clenched, the acrid smell of printed paper like a bitter reminder the past was never asleep. I spent the whole night tossing and turning with the stack of bank statements Evan had given me. The black, heavy numbers looked like another language, dry but dangerous, but I knew well. Behind them were secrets that could destroy an entire family. When dawn cast its pale light through the window, I was still sitting in the chair, my eyes red. I understood I couldn't keep guessing. I needed to find someone who had truly known Daniel before he disappeared, someone who could help me piece together the warped memory. In my mind, I thought of Mr. Lawson, Daniel's former attorney. He had once helped Daniel handle a few small lawsuits involving construction contracts before everything collapsed. After Daniel left, I'd lost contact, but I still remembered his old office in downtown Portland. I took a deep breath, put on my coat, and drove off, trying to push down the fear when I put my hands on the steering wheel. Mr. Lawson's office was small and modest, a red brick building with an iron staircase curling up to the second floor. The brass nameplate was faded, like the man himself, unpretentious but steady. When I stepped inside, he was sitting behind his desk, silver-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose, focused on a stack of papers. Tessa. He looked up, surprised, but his eyes stayed warm. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Yes, sir. My voice faltered, my heart racing. I came to ask about Daniel. At the sound of that name, Mr. Lawson's face fell. He set the papers aside, took off his glasses, and looked directly at me. I take it you've discovered something. I told him about the USB, the video, and the bank statements. He sat silently, his aged fingers drumming lightly on the desk, as if deciding whether to speak. Finally, he sighed. Daniel came to see me before he disappeared. He was shaken, saying he'd stepped into something far bigger than he'd realized. I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. He was investigating a foundation that looked charitable on the surface but showed signs of money laundering. He said he'd found documents proving illegal funds were flowing through it. And the person listed as the authorized founder was none other than your mother, Margaret Moore. My whole body went cold, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. I had suspected, but hearing Mr. Lawson confirm it nearly knocked me off balance. Not only that, he went on, his voice lowering, Daniel gave me a copy of the files. In them, besides Margaret's name, there was another name repeated many times in the sponsorship contracts and internal memos. I clenched my hands, almost whispering, "Who? Robert Hale." The name hit me like a drumbeat out of rhythm. I knew him. Who in Oregon didn't? Robert Hale was a local politician, once a rising star in the party, always on the news with his confident smile and slogans about transparency and public service. I'd once seen him shake Daniel's hand at a fundraising gala. Back then, I thought they were simply in the same circles. Now, I saw how naive I had been. Daniel told me, Mr. Lawson shook his head gently, that he intended to go public with everything. But only a week later he vanished. I waited, hoping he would return, but then, nothing. The image of Daniel in the video now carried a different weight, not a betraying husband, but a man who might have been forced into silence by powerful hands. And my mother somehow stood right in that network. "Tessa," Mr. Lawson said softly, looking at me with concern, "you must be extremely careful. If Robert Hale is involved, this is no longer a family matter. His influence is vast, and he won't hesitate to remove anyone in his way." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't know what had made Daniel brave enough to confront it, but I understood why he had disappeared. And I understood why my mother had said, "There are things you don't need to know." I left the office feeling as if I were carrying a heavy bomb. Portland's sky was gray, drizzle beginning to fall, the cold drops striking my face like sharp slaps. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the crowd pass, feeling like I'd wandered into a chess game far bigger than I'd ever imagined. The name Robert Hale beat in my head like a drum. And I knew sooner or later I would have to face him for Daniel, for the truth, and for myself. That afternoon, just as I returned from Portland, my phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering, my heart still heavy from the conversation with Mr. Lawson. "Tessa, tonight I want you to come for dinner. I have important guests. You should be there too." Her voice was even, not an invitation but a sweet command I knew well. I was about to refuse, but a feeling stopped me. I could hear her breathing on the other end faster than usual, as if she were tense. I replied softly, "Yes, Mom. I'll come." Hanging up, I sat still in the car, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. Two names rang in my head: Margaret Moore and Robert Hale. One was my mother, the other a politician pulling strings behind the curtain. And tonight, I felt they would appear together. My mother's house was brightly lit when I arrived. The garden lights were all on, casting a golden glow on the rose bushes, looking like a party. I climbed the steps, my heart heavy as stone. She opened the door, her smile gentle but her eyes flickering with control. "You're here. Come in, Tessa." In the living room, the smell of roasted meat and wine filled the air, the table set more lavishly than usual. At the table, besides my mother, stood a man rising to greet me. When my eyes met his, my breath caught. Robert Hale. He had been on countless campaign posters, had shaken hands with the mayor, had gone on television with speeches about civic responsibility. But standing in my mother's living room, he no longer looked like the friendly statesman. He wore a dark blue suit, a wine-colored tie, his smile slight but his eyes sharp as razors. "This is my daughter, Tessa," my mother introduced, her voice deliberately warm. Robert stepped closer, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you. Talented architect, isn't that right?" I reached out, forcing my hand not to tremble. "Thank you." We sat at the table. I chose the seat opposite, so I could watch both of them. Throughout dinner, my mother and Robert spoke warmly, like longtime allies. They discussed community projects, charities, upcoming campaigns. But beneath the sweet surface, I could feel the tension flowing. Robert raised his wine glass, his voice deep and smooth, as if telling a small story. "You know, Tessa, some houses have foundations that hide many secrets. Those secrets shouldn't be dug up, because once exposed, the whole house might collapse." His words fell on my ears like a blade of ice. I glanced at my mother, saw her nod slightly, the corner of her mouth curling into a faint smile. They were hinting at something. And they wanted me to hear it. I kept my voice calm, turning the glass of water in my hand. But if the foundation is already rotten, can the house stand forever? Robert narrowed his eyes at me, the smile still on his lips but his eyes no longer hiding their sharpness. You seem like someone who likes to dig deep, Tessa. But sometimes the digger ends up being the one buried. I bit my lip, holding back my reaction. In that moment I knew, they knew. They knew I had followed the clues about Daniel, about the Aurora Foundation, and those shadowy bank transactions. And tonight's dinner wasn't a family reunion, it was a warning. Margaret touched her wineglass lightly, her voice softening as if to smooth away the tension. Come now, we're here to enjoy dinner. But I couldn't swallow another bite. Every word, every glance in that room felt heavier than any spice on the table. I sat there, hearing the clink of cutlery on plates, the thin laughter, and felt myself sinking into a void. As Robert laughed at some trivial story, his eyes never left me, as if to confirm the chessboard was set, and I had been seen through. It was late at night when I drove away from my mother's house. The coastal road had sparse lights, darkness stretched like a heavy curtain, waves crashing against the cliffs in the distance. I gripped the wheel tightly, but my heartbeat still pounded, echoing in my chest. Tonight's dinner had been a staged play. My mother's smile, Robert Hale's sharp gaze, and the half-veiled remarks, all of it nothing less than a message that I had stepped too close to forbidden ground. When I reached home, I saw the mailbox slightly ajar. My heart clenched. Inside lay a brown envelope, neatly placed, with no sender's name. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling as if already knowing what it would say. If you want the truth about Daniel, dig under the oak tree behind the old house. The old house. The place where I once lived with Daniel, where I lost everything when he disappeared and the bank foreclosed. Now it belonged to new owners, but the old oak tree still stood there, like a silent witness. There was a fierce urge inside me, to go right away, tonight. My reason screamed that it could be a trap. But my heart knew the truth couldn't wait any longer. Rain began to fall as I left town. Heavy drops pounded on the windshield, the wipers sweeping back and forth like rapid breaths. The road to the old house was familiar yet foreign. I had driven it countless times, once with Daniel under the canopy of leaves. Now everything was the color of ash, as if time itself were testing me. When I stopped the car, the old house loomed in the darkness. Yellow light through the windows showed the new family sleeping inside. I didn't dare approach. Instead, I slipped around to the backyard, where the oak tree still stood tall in the rain. The rain grew heavier, pouring over my head and shoulders, soaking through my coat. I knelt at the base of the tree, my cold hands clawing at the damp earth. Soon my nails were caked with mud, my breath mingled with the raw smell of soil. I dug deeper until the spade struck something hard. Frantically, I scraped away the dirt. Beneath the heavy soil lay an old metal box, its lock rusted. I lifted it out, my whole body shaking from cold and anticipation. By the small beam of my flashlight, I forced the lock. After a struggle, the box popped open. Inside was a worn leather notebook, damp from rain but intact. I recognized the handwriting instantly, Daniel. I opened it. The wet pages clung together, the ink smeared but still legible. On the first page, the words were shaky but clear. If I disappear, don't trust your mother. I clutched the notebook, rain mixing with tears on my cheeks. My heart clenched painfully. All the doubts, all the scattered hints, now formed into a brutal truth. Daniel had left me this message years ago, as if predicting this very night. I turned a few more pages. The trembling words described shady money, meetings with Robert Hale, and Margaret present in nearly every major decision. Daniel wrote that he felt watched, that he might not have much time. He pleaded that if anyone ever found the notebook, they should bring it to light. The rain poured harder, every drop pounding on my shoulders, on the diary. I hugged it to my chest, filled with both agony and resolve. In that moment, I knew the path ahead had no way back. I stood, staring at the oak tree trembling in the storm, its leaves torn away. It looked like my own life once battered by storms, but its roots still deep, waiting for the day to push the truth upward. I returned home drenched, my hair dripping puddles onto the wooden floor. The metal box clung to me like an extension of my body. I couldn't set it too far from sight. After pulling on dry clothes and making a cup of hot tea, my heart still pounded, throbbing against my temples. Daniel's notebook lay open on the table, its blurred words exhaling the dampness of a past not yet gone. I called Evan immediately. "Tessa? It's late, what's going on?" I took a long breath, trying to steady my voice. I found a metal box buried under the oak tree at the old house. Inside was Daniel's journal, and a message for me. "All right. I'll come right away. Don't touch anything else." Half an hour later, Evan arrived, his coat wet from rain, his eyes widening at the sight of the old leather notebook. He sat, opened his laptop, the screen's blue glow sharp on his tense face. I handed him a few pages I'd already read, my voice shaking as I repeated the words. "If I disappear, don't trust your mother." Evan frowned, scanning the words quickly. He knew what was coming. "It's like a prepared file for a whistleblow. Can you dig deeper?" Daniel wouldn't have kept everything handwritten. He always kept digital backups. Evan was silent for a moment, then typed rapidly. "I'll try to access Daniel's old emails. If he's alive, maybe he still has hidden accounts. If not, I might still trace something." Time ticked by with the steady pounding of his keys. I sat quietly, hearing the familiar sound of the ocean wind against the glass, my nerves strung tight as if the house itself were waiting for judgment. Finally, Evan looked up, a sharp gleam in his eyes. I got in. A nearly abandoned mailbox, untouched for years. But Daniel had sent dozens of emails from it, most encrypted. "I'm unpacking them now." He opened the first file. On screen appeared a list of evidence, photos of bank ledgers, financial contracts, notes from secret meetings. The name Robert Hale surfaced again and again, alongside Margaret Moore and several businessmen. My voice broke. "Oh God. This is the charity Daniel once told me about. The Aurora Children's Foundation. I thought it was meant to help the community." Evan skimmed the details, his brow furrowing. "On paper, yes, it's a charity. In reality, it's a laundering front. Look, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, routed through offshore accounts, then returned under the label of medical grants." Daniel tracked the flow. I recoiled, my hands twisting together. "So, my mother was involved too." Evan opened another audio file, the speaker icon glowing. A click, then a man's voice whispering something indistinct. Next came a woman's voice, low, clear, unmistakable. "You will never ruin my daughter's future. She cannot know." I slumped into the chair, my heart stopping. That was my mother's voice. Undeniable. "Oh my God," I murmured, my hand covering my mouth. Evan looked at me, his eyes filled with both pity and horror. "Tessa. She knew everything. And she was directly involved." My throat tightened, tears spilling unchecked. In my mind flashed the elegant dinner, my mother across the table, smiling calmly as she poured wine for Robert Hale. All of it, a facade. I remembered being a child. Every time life got hard, my mother would take my hand and say, "You need to trust me." And now, her voice rang like a verdict. "She cannot know." I asked, my voice trembling. "Evan, what's the date on that recording?" 3 weeks before Daniel disappeared. I felt the ground crack beneath me. Evan gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "I know this breaks you. But it's also evidence. Daniel didn't vanish randomly. They shut him down because he uncovered this." We listened to more files. Daniel had carefully noted meetings with Robert Hale, the times he saw my mother with him. He wrote that the deeper he dug, the more trapped he felt in a web of power. "If I expose this, I may not survive," he wrote. I trembled reading each word, torn between grief and anger. Daniel had known the danger but kept going. And I, back then, only saw him vanish and leave me with crushing debt. I had hated him for 5 years, never imagining another story behind it. Evan spoke softly. "He tried to protect you. Maybe that's why your mother appeared in the recording, to keep you out of it, at any cost." I turned to him, my eyes red. "And in return?" "The truth buried, while I lived in lies, branded as the wife, abandoned." Evan stayed silent. He knew no words could comfort me now. I closed the notebook, laying it beside the laptop. The evidence, the voices, all of it cut into me like shards of glass. I was no longer the woman who built homes for clients, who drew clean, elegant blueprints. I now stood inside the ruins of my own family, a structure raised on dirty money, secrets, and blood. Outside, the rain began to ease. My hand resting on the blurred pages, while in my mind my mother's words echoed. She cannot know. Now I knew. And what awaited ahead was darker than this night. I spent many nights turning over Daniel's rain-soaked notebook and his recordings. Every time I closed my eyes, my mother's words rang again. Those words were chains binding me, pushing me to go further, to push beyond the fear. I knew I couldn't keep holding everything in the dark. I needed an outsider, someone who could bring the truth into the light without being bound by the names Moore or Hale. After days of deliberation, I sought out an investigative journalist Evan had once mentioned, Lauren Price, who had spent years pursuing financial scandals in the region. I called her through a public number. My voice trembling but forced steady. I have information about a charity foundation, and about Robert Hale. I need to meet you. Lauren was silent for a few seconds, then answered firmly. If what you're saying is real, I'll listen. But we'll meet in a public, safe place. We set the meeting for a Saturday afternoon, in a small cafe in downtown Portland where people constantly came and went. I prepared carefully, copied some of Daniel's emails, printed a few pages of his journal, and brought the recording. I knew it wasn't everything, but enough to begin. On the afternoon of our meeting, I drove into the city, my heart heavy but tinged with hope. The riverside road glowed with sunlight, pedestrians strolled, music spilled from shops. But inside me, everything was veiled in tension. I parked near the cafe, drew a deep breath, and prepared to walk in. But as I opened the car door, a harsh glare from the rearview mirror made me squint. From behind, a black SUV sped up and braked sharply at the curb, blocking my way. My heart lurched, my fingers instinctively clutching the bag of documents. The SUV door opened. Black leather shoes stepped out, followed by a tall frame so familiar my blood turned to ice. The man emerged from the shadows of the car, drizzle misting his hair, and those eyes I had once known too well. Daniel, I whispered, my throat dry. He stood a few steps away, his expression a mix of weariness and caution. His face was thinner, lines etched deeper than 5 years ago, but unmistakable. He was alive. I stepped back, my heart pounding erratically. Why are you here? After all these years? Daniel's eyes darted around, his voice low but urgent. There's no time, Tessa. You can't hand those files to anyone. I froze, clutching the bag tighter. You think I'll believe you? You left me buried in debt, vanished without a word, left me in darkness for 5 years. And now you appear, to tell me to stay silent. Daniel inhaled sharply, his eyes flashing red. I had no choice. If I had fought them then, I'd have been dead long ago. Them, meaning my mother and Robert Hale. I cut in, my voice shaking with anger. Yes. They forced me silent. They set up everything, even the debt in your name. I was made to sign a cooperation deal, or else. Not only would I lose my life, but you would be dragged down too. His words pierced like a blade, reopening wounds that had never healed. I remembered being branded the wife betrayed, pitied, mocked, crying alone in a cheap apartment at night. And now he stood here claiming it had been to protect me. I clenched my jaw. Protect me? You call that protecting me? Daniel was quiet a moment, then his voice lowered, pleading. You have every right to hate me. But believe this, I never stopped trying to protect you. I was the one who left the letter in your house, the one who hid the USB in the cabinet. I wanted you to know the truth, but only when you were strong enough to face it. Memories snapped together in my mind. The nameless letter, the USB, the box under the oak tree. They all led here, to this moment. And the man behind them was Daniel. Why now? I asked hoarsely. Why not sooner? Because now they suspect you. Robert spoke of houses whose foundations hide secrets. You're too close, Tessa. If you keep pushing, they won't spare you. I took another half step back, torn between rage and fear I'd never known. So what do you want? Daniel reached out, fingers brushing the bag I clutched, his voice breaking. I want us to do this together. Not for revenge, but to end it. I've lived as a shadow long enough. But you're the only reason I'm still breathing. His words strangled me. In those weary eyes, I saw the man who once built dreams with me in our first home. But I also saw the shadows, the danger clinging to him. I stared at Daniel as the rain thickened, car horns echoing in the distance, pressing down on the suffocating air. Could I trust him again? I returned home with my mind in knots. Meeting Daniel in that parking lot had been like a waking nightmare. He was real, alive, both familiar and foreign, and his words gnawed at me. If what he said was true, then my mother hadn't known she had orchestrated it all. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at Daniel's journal, at the USB Evan had decoded, and at the bank statements with Margaret Moore's name inked bold as scars. I had feared, avoided, hoped my mother's words at dinner had only been a test. But now, the truth left no more shadows. The next morning, I drove into her house without calling first. The old hilltop home with its white porch and rose bushes she tended daily. Oregon's sky hung low, fog wrapping the scene like a tragic stage curtain. She opened the door, surprised for a moment, then recovered her usual calm face. "You're early. Come in, I just made tea." I stepped inside, the faint scent of lavender filling the air. The furnishings neat and cozy as always, but now it felt staged, like a set. I placed the bag of documents on the table and met her eyes. "Mom, I want the truth." Margaret froze a second, then smiled, as if still controlling the scene. "Tessa, what's made you so serious?" I didn't circle around. I pulled out the statements, the leather journal, and played the recording Evan had sent. Daniel's voice, then hers, filled the silent room. "You will never ruin my daughter's future. She cannot know." She went still. Her eyes darkened. She set the teacup down, her hands trembling. "You found everything." "Yes. And now I want to hear it from you. No more riddles, no more, there are things you don't need to know." Margaret leaned back, as if the weight of her secrets had nowhere left to hide. She sighed, her voice slow. "Fine. If you know, I have no reason to cover anymore." The truth spilled from her own mouth. Margaret admitted she had been deep in the laundering scheme of the Aurora Children's Foundation. She spoke of years tangled in networks of power, of signing papers she knew were wrong. "You think I did it for money?" Her eyes glinted with exhaustion and bitterness. "No. I did it for family. The powerful could crush us with one decision. I chose to walk with them, to protect you, to secure our future, even if you hate me for it." I shook with fury and grief. "Protect me? By turning your own daughter into a pawn in a filthy game? By destroying my marriage, letting Daniel vanish, leaving me humiliated? For years?" Margaret bowed her head. "Daniel, without me he would be dead. Robert wanted him gone when he found the evidence. I begged, promised to keep you out. I had to choose, Tessa. And I chose for you to live, even if you despised me." Her words struck like blows. I collapsed into the chair, torn apart. Daniel survived, because of her. But she had also created all of this. "Do you even know what I've lived through?" I sobbed. "I lost everything. My trust, myself." Margaret stepped closer, her trembling hand reaching for my shoulder, but I pulled away. She stopped, her voice raspy. "I know. And I'll bear all your hatred. But if I had to choose again, I would. Because it was the only way to keep you here, alive, before me." I looked at her, seeing a life of sacrifice and calculation, but also a stain that could never wash clean. I wanted to scream, to embrace her, but instead I sat still, my heart torn raw. The window rattled. An engine roared closer outside. Before I could ask, Margaret's face paled. She pulled back the curtain. A black SUV stopped out front, just like the night Daniel appeared. She stepped back, lips trembling. "Robert." My chest sank. The car door opened. Robert Hale stepped out, confident stride, dark coat, cold eyes. He entered without knocking, a few burly men behind him. The air thickened, the smell of smoke and leather flooding the once familiar room. Robert smirked, his voice cutting sharp. "Touching, really. But every family has limits. And you've crossed too far. I shot to my feet, my eyes locked on him. What do you want? Robert narrowed his eyes, glanced at Margaret, then looked back at me. I want to clean up. That's simple. Daniel betrayed me, Margaret was weak, and now the daughter is about to play hero. I can't let 3 shadows lurk behind me forever. Margaret's face went pale. She stepped forward, her voice hoarse. Robert, don't. She's my daughter. Robert laughed, but there was no joy in it. And that's the problem, Margaret. You let motherly love ruin the plan. Now it's too late. The order's already given. Eliminate all 3. I could hear my heartbeat slamming in my chest, cold sweat sliding down my temple. In Robert's eyes there was nothing but deadly certainty. And I understood the moment of choice had come. Either stand still and be swallowed whole, or find a way to strike back in the dark. I had never imagined there would come a day I'd sit with Daniel and Evan in a small room, the only light cast from a laptop screen, planning how to expose the woman who gave me life. But that was the reality. Everything had crossed the line of endurance. When Robert gave the order to eliminate all 3, I knew it was either strike first or be buried. Daniel stayed silent most of the evening. He sat slouched in his chair, hollow eyes staring off, until Evan spoke up with an idea, a secret live stream. Then Daniel finally lifted his head. If the public sees, if everything is laid bare in real time, they won't have a chance to silence us, Evan said firmly. It was bold, reckless, but the only path forward. I nodded. We'll do it. But every step has to be precise. We chose a rented room in a small suburban hotel, where the signal was strong and no one would notice. Evan set up hidden cameras, a few in bags, one clipped into a button on Daniel's shirt, another disguised as a pen on the table. All linked to a private server, ready to stream across multiple platforms at once. We set a dead man's switch. If the stream dropped, the full archive would auto-send to counsel and 3 reporters. Daniel eyed the equipment, a bitter smile flickering at his lips. How ironic. 5 years ago I was destroyed by cameras hidden in my own home. Now we'll use cameras to return the truth. I brushed my hand lightly over his, then pulled away, tangled in emotions I couldn't name. The plan was this. Daniel would stage a plea for a final negotiation with Robert and Margaret, promising to hand over everything he and I supposedly had. The meeting would be at a private office Robert often used for discreet gatherings. I would appear with Daniel, as collateral. And Evan, from afar, would control the stream. That day the sky was heavy gray, drizzle clinging to the city. I wore a long black coat, a blank USB in my pocket as bait. Daniel walked beside me, looking steadier than in days past, though I noticed his hand trembling slightly around the briefcase handle. Robert's office was high in a glass tower, the entry elegant but deserted. The guards recognized him and waved us through. Inside, Margaret was already seated, her face pale, eyes weary yet still holding that proud veneer. Robert stood by the window, back turned, a glass of wine in hand. Finally decided to show up. His voice rasped with authority. Daniel set the briefcase on the table, speaking slowly. I came to end this. But only if Tessa and I walk away safe. Robert laughed, turning toward us. You still think you're in a position to make demands? In my earpiece Evan whispered. All cameras live. Signal strong. Rolling. My pulse kicked hard, but my face stayed composed. Daniel opened the case, empty except for an envelope. He slid it across the table. This is a copy of what I kept. Robert opened it, his eyes flashing as he skimmed the dense printouts. He glanced at Margaret. See? I told you he wouldn't dare resist. My mother looked at me, her lips trembling. For the first time her eyes held not power or pride but fear. Robert sat down, his voice low, threatening. Daniel, you used to be clever. But too much cleverness gets you killed. You should have stayed gone, left your ex-wife safe in her shell. But you chose to come back. So, enough. I cut him off, my voice slicing the tension. I've read Daniel's journal. I've heard the recordings. I know what this foundation really is. And I know it was my mother who signed its charter. Margaret burst out. Tessa, stop. But I didn't. I turned to Robert. You think you can keep everyone quiet forever? You're wrong. Right then Evan pressed the switch. A A wall screen meant for presentations lit up. Robert's face, Margaret's, Daniel's, mine, our words spoken were streaming live. Robert shot to his feet, eyes wild. "What the hell is this?" Evan whispered in my ear. "Over 10,000 watching. Rising fast." Margaret panicked, turning to me. "What have you done, Tessa? You don't understand." I answered, my voice breaking yet firm. "You told me everything was to protect me. But I don't need protection built on lies anymore." Robert lunged at the briefcase, slamming it to the floor, papers scattering. He roared, "Shut it down. Shut it off now." Daniel stepped in front of me, his voice steady and strong. "No one can shut it down now. It's already out there." On the screen, comments flooded in, calls for investigation, denunciations of Robert and Margaret. Their once powerful faces had become living evidence. Margaret trembled, tears streaking down her cheeks. She looked at me, her voice breaking. "Tessa, I only wanted to keep you out of this." I met her eyes, my heart tearing, but I couldn't turn back. Before we walked in, Evan mirrored the stream to multiple newsrooms and emailed a time-stamped package to the district attorney's office. He also placed a 911 call, flagging a credible threat recorded on file. Sirens wailed outside. Evan whispered, "They're here." Robert lost control, bolting for the door, but officers burst in, pinning him down as he shouted and cursed. The cameras kept rolling. Margaret didn't fight. She collapsed into a chair, hands covering her face, her once familiar presence now just a shadow. Daniel turned to me. "You did it, Tessa. Not for you but for everyone." The next morning, after Robert's arrest, the city was awash with breaking news. Hale's name dominated newspapers, TV, and every feed. Clips from the forced confessions spread like wildfire. They called it the biggest political financial shock in years. But in my small apartment, there was no cheering, no satisfaction. Only exhaustion through every bone, and the sense of dust finally settling. Daniel appeared 2 days later. He stood in my doorway, familiar frame, eyes filled with hope. I knew what he wanted to say before he spoke. "Tessa." His low voice carried 5 lost years. "Now it's different. We can start again, can't we?" In his eyes I saw remorse, longing, but also something that could never be restored. Not because I didn't care, but because the cracks had grown unbridgeable. Those years hadn't taken my youth. They had made me someone else. I sighed, shook my head gently. "Daniel, when a foundation is cracked, you can't rebuild the house. We're the same." His hand tightened, trying to hold on to something already gone. A pang of sorrow touched me, but calm settled deeper. I no longer needed to cling to the past. In the months after, I poured myself into work. Not to forget, but to build anew. I proposed a project to the city council, a community housing center for those who had lost everything in financial scams. I named it the Saul House, the House of Light. When I presented, I spoke of sleepless nights, of betrayal, of losing shelter. I didn't name names, didn't mention my mother or Daniel. I only said, "A house is not brick and wood. It is light so people can find themselves again." The council approved swiftly, buoyed by public support. And as the first bricks were laid, I stood at the site, listening to hammers and timber striking, feeling a strange faith rise inside. I wasn't only building houses, I was rebuilding myself. One late afternoon, coming home from the site, I found an envelope placed neatly at my door. No name. My heart stirred, half familiar, half wary. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed words plain. "It wasn't me who saved you. You saved yourself. A friend in the dark." I sat down, the page trembling in my hand. Who had sent the letters from the beginning? Daniel had claimed the USB, the kitchen note. But this tone, cold, observant, wasn't his. It felt like another hand, one that had always been watching. I gazed out the window at Oregon's night, streetlights shimmering over the distant sea. And in that moment, I felt no fear, no confusion. I felt open, embracing the mystery as part of the whole. Because maybe what matters isn't who saved me, but that I rose from ruin and walked on my own. And that friend in the dark would remain an unanswered question, a secret I wasn't ready or didn't need to solve. I tucked the letter into my desk drawer, beside the plans for the Saul house. Two pieces side by side, an unsolved secret, and a project of light. They coexisted, reminding me life always weaves shadow and brightness together. And so, my story closes with an anonymous letter, but opens into a space where each of us must wonder, how many secrets lie buried in the foundations we thought were solid? And sometimes, the point isn't who pulls us from the dark, but the moment we dare to stand, to rebuild our house with light and trust. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my place, would you forgive, chase the past, or commit to a new path entirely? Share your feelings in the comments because every voice, every ordinary story, can shine as a lantern for someone else. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to follow the channel, so we can keep listening, sharing, and discovering more stories about family, kinship, and life's unexpected turns together.